Would you like to play some football?
Hey, welcome to another edition of Gridiron and the Gospel, a faith and college football podcast. I'm George Schroeder.
And I'm Brad Edwards, and man, what a Saturday. And it was one of those, I wouldn't say it happens every year, but those of us who've been fans for a long time have seen a few of these where you look at the schedule, you don't think anything interesting is likely to happen, and then just everything starts happening. We saw some major upsets. We saw a major comeback and a few other significant results out there, George, but I think there's only one place to start. There's a lot to mention, but only one place to start.
5 teams ranked in the AP's top 11 as of going into the weekend lost. One almost joined them, but didn't. And you're right, there is only one place to start, and it's the Cumberland River where Lower Broadway ends, and the goalposts from the stadium in Vanderbilt are in the Cumberland River in Nashville right now. That's where we start, Nashville, where Vanderbilt beat Alabama for the first time in 40 years, since 1984. It's not 40 meetings, but it's a lot of losses. A seismic upset. 1 week ago, we were all going, look at Alabama. Oh, my goodness. Even though Georgia came back and made the second half into a crazy cool game, Alabama beat Georgia in a clash of what looked like titans. And then Vanderbilt comes in and knocks them off and really looked, didn't feel fluky on the day. Go ahead.
Yeah, that was to me, the most surprising thing about it. Let me start with this. Some of you know, I went to Alabama. I grew up in the South. I grew up in Mississippi. And I think for anyone who grew up in SEC country, you can't not, I'm a double negative here. You can't not feel good or happy for Vanderbilt, right? So
does that mean you do feel good? I'm not sure.
I do. I'm so happy for Vanderbilt, right? Like I'm disappointed in my team, but I mean, we have all watched Vanderbilt just lose and lose and lose, and then even when they have a chance to do something special, find a way to blow it. And that was what was so surprising to me about this game, George. Vanderbilt had so many chances to fold under pressure. Like they got the big lead. They never trailed in this game. They scored. They took the opening kickoff, marched down, scored a touchdown. Alabama's first possession ends up with a ball that's tipped. Vanderbilt intercepts, returns for a touchdown. Vanderbilt missed the extra point, but they're up 13-0 out of the gate. They never trailed, but Alabama started responding as you expected them to. Like everybody watching knows, okay, Alabama's going to start scoring, and they did. Vanderbilt kept answering offensively.
At 13 nothing Vandy, I thought, 35-13 Alabama. I mean, I actually texted a friend. We were watching the game and we were texting back and forth. I said, 35-13 Alabama. But let me ask you this. I know how dumb that looks now, but didn't you think the same thing if you were watching in real time? Didn't people think the same thing if you're being honest with yourself? And I don't mean you, I mean you, the listener. Nobody thought that Alabama wasn't going to come back and win, even at 13-0.
Oh, at 13, I mean, look, even at, when we got to the end, toward the end, and Vanderbilt had to settle for a field goal, and Alabama gets the ball back at one point. I guess it was when they were down 5, and you're like, okay, Alabama's going to come down now, take the lead, whatever, this thing's over. Vanderbilt gets a sack, strip, fumble. They recover. Then they go down and they score to go up 12. And then you're like, okay, all right. Well, Alabama's going to march right back down. And they did. Alabama still has all 3 timeouts left. They kick it back to Vanderbilt. Very first play, tackle Vandy for a 2-yard loss. 2nd and 12. You're thinking, okay, here goes the 3 and out, kick back to Alabama. They're going to go down and win the game. We all know it's going to happen. Alabama couldn't get the ball back. And that was the story of the game. Vandy just kept making play after play after play, and they never did the Vanderbilt thing. They looked like a team that had been there before. And like you said, it was no fluke. And I think that's probably the most unnerving thing about it if you're an Alabama fan, is that there's no reason that several more teams couldn't do to Alabama's defense what Vanderbilt just did. because they didn't take advantage of 4 turnovers or, special teams touchdown or something that you would say isn't going to go out and, isn't likely to happen again. It was just Alabama's defense couldn't get stops, which, by the way, is the same thing we saw in the second half of the Georgia game. So now it's like 6 straight quarters. Alabama's defense has looked completely helpless. And to me, that is more of a concern than just the simple fact that they lost as a huge favorite against Vanderbilt.
Well, let's keep in mind, look, first of all, congrats Clark Lee, congrats Commodores, congrats Commodore fans who routinely, go to the stadium and have more of the other team's fans. And that's probably nowhere more true than when it's Alabama or, say, Tennessee. But when they go to their home games, they have more of the other team's fans than theirs. Congrats to y'all. Very cool. And Diego Pavia, what a tremendous pickup from New Mexico State. In this new world of transfer portal and NIL, you got this 5th-year guy. But real quick, I mean, we're not talking about the upper echelon of upper echelon quarterbacks in the SEC or beyond that Alabama's, got a chance to face this year, right? So, but I want to say one thing real quick. Diego Pavia did not have an FBS level scholarship offer coming out of high school. He was actually not rated. He was not ranked on like the 247, 24/7 composite recruiting rankings. He went to a junior college for 2 years and then to New Mexico State.
He's from New Mexico, and the University of New Mexico is where he wanted to go, and they didn't even offer him a scholarship.
So he goes to a low-level junior college, plays 2 years, and ends up at New Mexico State, and now he's at Vanderbilt, and a couple of others from his team came too. And by the way, so to go back to this, so Vanderbilt has 24 people coming in from the portal. I mean, this is the new world, right? And so basically, Clark Lee been at Vanderbilt. Things weren't going well, just like basically every other Vanderbilt coach except for James Franklin. And he took advantage of sort of the NIL and the portal and remade his team. And they're dangerous. We saw that earlier in the year. They could have, would have, should have beat Missouri. We'll get to Missouri in a minute, maybe a few minutes, potentially, just a blip. But he remade his team. And they're actually pretty good. I think we're looking at a bowl team in Vanderbilt, believe it or not, which is not saying a lot, but it's saying an awful lot for Vandy. That said, Alabama's supposed to win that game, and they're supposed to win big.
Yeah.
Supposed to win big. Welcome. Let me just say this. Welcome, Kalen DeBoer, to Alabama football. Do not listen to Paul Feinbaum's show this week. Because you're about to learn what it means to be the Alabama football coach. And that ain't going to be good for this week.
I think you're going to hear a lot of Alabama fans say, if you haven't already heard them say it, this would not have happened under Nick Saban. And that may or may not be true, but one thing that is true is that under Nick Saban, Alabama did not lose games like this.
They had some games like this, but they won them.
They won them, okay? And in the final 16 seasons, Saban was there for 17 seasons. So take away season 1 when we remember the loss to Louisiana Monroe. His final 16 seasons, Alabama lost 1 game to a team that was ranked outside of the top 20. And that was at Kyle Field, primetime on CBS. And it was, a team that had a lot more talent than Vanderbilt. I mean, this is a more talented Vanderbilt team than we're used to seeing, certainly than we saw last year. But that was a very talented team from A&M that beat Alabama in that 1 game. And you didn't see Nick Saban teams win a big game and then come out flat the next week. It's like they knew they were always going to get everyone's best shot. That didn't mean they always played their A game, but you didn't see results like this. And you mentioned Diego Pavia earlier. The play that I thought was the most significant in that game, Vanderbilt, let me just backtrack a little bit. Vanderbilt, if you didn't see the final box score, was 12 for 18 on 3rd downs. That's why they won the game. Alabama couldn't stop them. They had plenty of chances to get the ball back. But 2 of the 6 times they didn't convert on 3rd down, one of them, Alabama had 2 players on the field wearing the same jersey number when Vanderbilt punted back to them. The penalty gave Vandy a 1st down, and they proceeded to drive down and score a touchdown. One of the other 2 that they didn't convert on third down. It was a 4th and 1, and some of you have seen it on the highlights, where it was just kind of a play action fake, and instead of just trying to get the first down and move the chains, Vandy went for it all, and Pavia threw a pass under pressure as he was getting hit, just releases one long to the end zone, hits his receiver right in stride, and that was the play, George, when I first thought Alabama might be in trouble here. And the thing is, Alabama kept making plays, though. Like the Ryan Williams touchdown we saw for the game winner against Georgia last week, he had a similar play that he made in this game in order to get Alabama back within a score. And so, Alabama made some plays in this game that if you're Vanderbilt, you're just like, man, this isn't our day. Like they're just, they're making plays. But once again, Vandy never folded. And that was the thing. That's the thing that they have to be so proud of, is that there was not that's why you're Vanderbilt moment.
Right. No, that's exactly right. And so, man, the scene on the field, obviously there'll be a fine involved. And the scene on the field was fantastic when the students and fans rushed the field. And I understand why we don't want field storming. But man, it sure is fun when it happens because
they
of
deserved
everything,
it, right?
Everything it represents as to why they're doing it, right? I mean, so congrats to Vanderbilt. Real quick, where does that leave you with Alabama?
Yeah. So that was what I was going to want to get to before we go on to the next game, which I think
the next field storm.
Yeah, exactly. But I'll just say this as far as where Alabama is now. I don't believe that there was any other college football season within the last at least 50 years, if not 100 years, where you could survive a loss to Vanderbilt and still have a chance to win the national championship.
Well, come on, wait. I mean, into the 4-team playoff, they would have to run the table now, but they could run the table.
In the 4-team playoff, and especially with Vanderbilt, was in the SEC East, Alabama was in the West, they could have lost this game, won the rest of them, won the SEC, and depending on what happened in the other conferences, they may have still gotten in. They would have had a chance, if not a good chance,
Brad,
as a one-loss SEC champ.
It's Alabama. They get like a bump in the committee's eyes.
But in this case, there's no question, this does not end Alabama's season. And much like the loss to Northern Illinois didn't end Notre Dame's season. Now, Notre Dame might have to win them all the rest of the way. Alabama, I'm not even sure they have to win them all. I think if they don't lose more than one additional game, 10-2 might get them in, because they're going to have to beat at least one more pretty good team in order to go 10-2. Yeah, I mean, Alabama's not in desperation mode, but here's my question. What will we see from Alabama after this? I think that's going to be a good indicator. Because last week we talked about Ole Miss laying a major egg in conference play, losing at home to Kentucky. Ole Miss came back out on Saturday and just completely looked like a different team against South Carolina, winning 23. So if Alabama does something like that, not necessarily this week, but if Alabama 2 weeks from now goes and wins in Knoxville, then, this is kind of water under the bridge, and it's probably not going to hurt their season. That said, that takes us to, to the Tennessee Vols, and now one of these teams more than likely is going to suffer a lot of damage from what happened to them this past weekend, because Tennessee was another top 5 team that had an unexpected upset.
Yeah, the Vols went into Fayetteville for a primetime game, and they were the victims of an upset and then a field storming by the Razorback fans. That game, what was the final?
It was 19-14, I believe.
19-14, Arkansas won. And, I think there's a lot of things we can take away from it. Among other things, Tennessee's offense has kind of gotten slowed down against the 2 credible defenses they played so far. I think Oklahoma's defense is better than Arkansas's, and they played better offensively against Oklahoma than they did against Arkansas. But we were talking about them being this big juggernaut, Tennessee's offense, that is. And now that they've run into defenses with a pulse, and in this case, more than a pulse, these last couple defenses, they're not scoring at the same clip, and they're not going to score at the same clip. And so if the other opponent can find some offense, they're going to be in these kinds of games, and they could lose to them. When you're scrabbling with an Oklahoma, especially when an Oklahoma that had quarterback issues and had coughed up the football going in a couple of times, which might have changed the game had they not coughed up the football going in And when you're scrabbling against an Arkansas team that doesn't have a super potent offense, especially after Taylon Green goes down and they can't move the ball at all until they needed to at the very last second. They got about 4 plays and found a way downfield and scored that touchdown. If you run into people with offenses and a semblance of a defense, Tennessee could be in trouble. And we thought maybe they were world beaters. Instead, they got beaten in Fayetteville.
Yeah, and I think you said it, George, which is that Tennessee's offense, when they have played defenses that have not allowed their receivers to run free,
right, that's
it has
a
not
novel
been
concept
easy for them.
But
yeah, right. And Tennessee, to me, unquestionably, is much better on defense than they are on offense.
That's the surprising thing, right?
Yeah, it is. It is, and I think that's
and they're really good defensively. They're really
they
good.
are, and that's what gives them a chance to still be in this thing. Is that defense? I don't think anybody's going to score a lot of points on Tennessee, but like you said, that Tennessee's going to have to score to win some of these games. I mean, you think about like Alabama and Georgia. I would expect they're at least going to score in the 20s on Tennessee. So Tennessee's going to have to do a better job of being able to produce points, and that means they're going to have to generate more in the passing game. I think they're pretty good in the running game, but they had no passing game against Arkansas, and that ended up making the difference. They were just completely one-dimensional, and like you said, young quarterback, growing pains, all that stuff. Man, he looks great in his uniform. He looks like an All-American in his uniform, right? He's got the height, and he's got the big arm. Even when he runs, he's got the long stride. But as far as the accuracy and some of the other elements of having the offense in sync, he's not there yet. And Tennessee needs to hope he gets there sooner rather than later.
You can see it. Nico, and I will. It'll take me a year and a half to pronounce his name, and then he'll be off to the NFL.
I think it's Iamaliava.
Thank you.
There you go.
As I was saying, Nico, Nico, he has got the ability. He's got the talent. He's got all the tools. And, man, he can make things happen. But he also occasionally plays like the freshman that he is. And better defenses that clamp down on the receivers make it tough on him. Sometimes he makes plays, and a lot of times he just looks like a freshman. I still think Tennessee is a really good team. Are they a surefire playoff team? I don't think we know, but I think you have to dial back that, and let's just wait and see a little bit. But one other thing, by the way, what a great win for Arkansas and for Sam Pittman. And I just have to say this. Hey, man, I'm from Arkansas. Behind me, I've got that big old original Uncle Heavy's hog hat that my dad gave me. It's up behind me on my shelf as a decorative piece. My friends and family, I promise you, they are over the moon today. Let me put it this way. Everybody got up and went to church today because they were happy. And those days have been few and far between for Arkansas football fans. So I'm happy for them. Great win for Arkansas. And we'll see what that means for either one of these teams going forward.
Yeah. The last thing for me on Arkansas is that what I thought they would be so proud of is that this wasn't like Vanderbilt where they led wire to wire. Although Vanderbilt, as we mentioned, for its own reasons, should be very proud. Arkansas is up 3-0 at halftime. They had blown some chances to have a bigger lead. Tennessee comes right down the field and scores touchdowns in its first 2 possessions the second half, makes it 14-3. And at that point, the way the Tennessee defense was not only playing that evening, but playing all year, you're like, they're done. Well, Arkansas then responds with their own touchdown. And then they respond again with another drive, but the quarterback is injured on that drive. Okay, they are not able to punch it in the end zone after he goes out of the game. They settle for a field goal that cuts it to 14-13. And with the backup, a few drives with him in there, they didn't get a first down. They looked hapless. You can't blame him. He's, inexperienced guy, just doesn't – he's thrown into a really tough situation. And you're figuring when Tennessee punts them deep late in the game, this is it. This is it for Arkansas. Probably 3-and-out, game over, 4-and-out, game over. And like you said, they put together a drive when they needed it, and it was mostly on the ground. And that, to me, was what was so impressive, is that Arkansas did it in a not only as responding after falling down 14-3, but being able to put that drive together at the end to win it with a backup quarterback. And then obviously defense coming up with a stop on that last drive by the Vols.
Yeah, they did. And they let them get down to the 25. But then, and you thought, boy, here come the Vols. But then they stopped them at that point, and time finally ran out on the Vols. One quick thing about that. the backup quarterback scored with 1:17 left to take the lead. And it was pretty clear that all of a sudden, once they got all the way down there, that Arkansas was going to milk the clock and maybe kick a field goal and win it, with 7 seconds left or something. I haven't done the math. And that it's pretty clear that Tennessee let him score, which if we had like a full segment, and we don't, so I just want to mention that, we could like debate forever the idea of doing that, not just because it didn't work out for them, but whether that's a great idea or not. But it was just interesting. It's an intriguing footnote in the moment. It only changed the score, frankly, because Arkansas may have scored a touchdown anyway, or they would have kicked a field goal. It was, chip shot range. I mean, they were down at the 3 or the 4. It was going to happen.
Yeah. So the way I look at that, like I said, we don't want to get bogged down in it, but we have seen, if you've been watching a lot of college football this year, you have seen quite a few like 55-plus yard field goals. I mean, the range on these guys getting longer and longer. I can't speak to the range of Tennessee's kicker because I don't know, but my quick math was if Tennessee had used its timeouts, forced Arkansas to kick a go-ahead field goal, they would have gotten the ball back with about 30 seconds left, no timeouts, and needed a field goal to win. Look, if I've got somebody who can hit from at least up to 55, to me, that feels more likely than a scenario where you need to get in the end zone.
Yeah.
But you know what? It's maybe neither way works for you. But you're right. It was an interesting decision.
Third thing. All right. We talked about these so Missouri lost to A&M early in the day, 41-10, and
which was not an upset.
And it wasn't that close. It wasn't an upset by, basically who was favored, but it also wasn't an upset. And I think it's an example of a team that was overranked in the preseason based on a nice year last year and an overrating of what happened against a shell of an Ohio State team in the Cotton Bowl. That was a great win and a great season for Missouri. They didn't actually play the Ohio State team we saw all last year, and that's not this year. None of that is this year. This Missouri team, quite frankly, hasn't done a ton to be ranked, much less top 10. But I want to say 2 things. One, Connor Wigman came back. He took a lot of abuse after not playing exceptionally well at all against Notre Dame. And he came back after having, what was a shoulder? And he looked really good. And A&M looks like a really good team. A&M looks like a really good team. And he's better. They're better offensively with him at the helm than with Marcel Reed at this point. I think A&M is a team we need to start thinking about for the playoff at some point. Yeah, if we're talking about as opposed to some of these teams we're talking about now, as opposed to a Tennessee, as opposed certainly to a Missouri, I'm not thinking about them at all. As opposed to maybe an Ole Miss, at least elevate A&M into that bracket of conversation.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
No, so George, I was just going to say, I mean, I guess I'll first say this with Missouri. Even though I agree with you, they haven't really done anything that would make them deserving of what their ranking was. The overtime win over Vanderbilt suddenly doesn't look as bad as we thought it was when it first happened. But you mentioned A&M and how we have to start there are a lot of teams in the SEC that I think maybe not a lot, but another one is LSU, right? That we kind of took that opening game loss and we kind of forgot about them.
Right.
Because I'm looking right now at SEC standings, okay, not necessarily based on the conference standings, but just the overall records. Obviously, Texas is undefeated. They're the only undefeated team left in the SEC.
It's amazing.
But we've discussed this before. Any team that goes 10-2 against the SEC schedule has a very good chance to be in the playoff. And there are, I want to say it's 8 teams right now in the SEC that have 1 loss. So A&M, LSU, Georgia, Missouri, Tennessee, Ole Miss, Alabama, and Oklahoma are all sitting there with 1 loss. Some of those, I think we had forgotten they only have 1 loss. But yeah, I mean, all of those teams, mathematically speaking, are still in it. They control their destiny. But some of them have a much easier path to get there than others.
Well, and that's the other thing, too. Even if they do get there at 10-2, I think some of them, the committee, and it'll depend on everywhere else and the other contenders for these spots, these 7 at-large spots. But some of these guys have a much easier path to 10-2. Missouri could still end up 10-2, and because their schedule's not maybe what the next team, if we did like a schedule comparison of Team A versus Team B versus Team C, So that's something to keep in mind. But you're right. There's a lot of people still available for the playoff, and a lot of them we're going to figure out maybe aren't playoff contenders. But we've had a reordering after this last week. Remember when we thought this weekend was going to be a dud, and it turned out to be the best weekend so far. Late last night, early this morning. We record this thing on Sunday afternoon, Sunday evening every week. But Miami made a 2,500-mile trip out to Cal. Thank you, ACC realignment and expansion. And game day was there. It was one of those traditional West Coast. You've been out to those West Coast game days in Eugene. That's when you and I first met.
Right.
And those game days are lit. They're fire because they don't come out there very often. And it's pre-dawn. And the students have been there since, 10 o'clock the night before. And who knows what they've been doing the whole time.
Who knows?
They're fired up and ready. Game day was there. And then like 12 hours later or something, they finally kick off the game and it ends at like 3 o'clock Eastern time in the morning and 2 o'clock Central time, depending on our deal. Miami's down 35-10 to Cal and comes back and wins it with a touchdown with 26 seconds left, 39-38. Cam Ward is, you know what? The bad news for him is that's like a Heisman performance by Cam Ward in the comeback. And yet it was like he was still at Washington State. Nobody saw it because it happened so late at night out on the West Coast.
That was the old argument was always the
Pac-12
bias.
after dark.
Right. And that, nobody sees these Pac-12 guys play because they're playing so late. Well, now nobody's seeing the ACC guys play because it's so late.
Make it a point to watch Cam Ward if you haven't yet. The guy is phenomenal. And he led them back from double-digit deficits the last 2 weeks, Virginia Tech and then against Cal. So I don't know what that says about Miami as a team, and maybe you're going to tell me what you think. But this kid is phenomenal.
Oh, he absolutely is. And I think he's going to be there for the duration in that Heisman mix. So, whether he ends up winning it, it depends on, whether he keeps pulling out games or whether they lose a couple. But at this point, you look at Miami, and while I was not expecting either of these last two to be close, and they ended up, being like semi-miraculous for Miami to come away with a win, they won. And that's more than you can say for Alabama and Tennessee. And so as much as like in past seasons, I might have looked at those results and said, hey, when you have back-to-back scares like that against unranked teams, Virginia Tech and Cal, that doesn't look good because we used to talk about style points. Remember that, George? Like it's not just do you win, it's how impressively do you win against certain teams.
Right.
And I think we're seeing a lot of evidence these past few weeks that this is about survival. And if you just find a way to win these games, your record by itself is probably going to get you in at the end. And the style is going to matter for the ones that are only on the absolute bubble. And
right.
So for Miami, that all that it comes down to is they found a way to win 2 weeks in a row. They are, in position. And let me throw this out at you for people who have not really paid much attention to the ACC. I know when we discussed it preseason, we were kind of debating over whether the ACC would be a one team into the playoff league or maybe two teams.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we're sitting here right now, and granted, it's still very early, and as we've seen, just about anything can happen in a given week. But by my eye test, the top three teams in the league are Miami, Clemson, and SMU. SMU, for those who we don't have time to talk about it, but SMU made a quarterback change a few weeks ago. Their new guy is dynamic, and I really enjoyed watching him against Louisville. I think they're a dangerous team, but here's the thing. 16-team league, Clemson, Miami, and SMU, all undefeated in conference play.
Mm-hmm.
None of them play the other two. No head-to-head meetings between the three. So in theory, now there's a lot of football left to be played, and I'm sure somebody's going to be upset. But in theory, all three of those teams could go undefeated through the league, and one of them wouldn't be able to play in the conference championship game. So there's something to stew on. But here's the thing. If you're the ACC, when you've got Alabama losing to Vanderbilt and Tennessee losing to Arkansas, if you get to the end of the season and you've got, let's just say, an 11-1 SMU that's not in the conference championship game, and the committee is weighing that against a 10-2 team from the SEC that has a really bad loss, I'm not so sure. I might be wrong, but I'm not so sure that SMU doesn't get in. because it remains to be seen whether the committee is still going to put the most emphasis on the loss column as they always have done in the past. So I think this is set up very well potentially for the ACC, given that these teams don't play each other.
Yeah. Meanwhile, the Big 12, which would be the other contender for a couple of spots, is, scrabbling around, and we'll see. Iowa State 5-0, by the way. Good for the Cyclones. First time since I think 1980. Couple of things we should mention, right? Michigan and Washington played a rematch, air quotes, of the national title game. Neither team much resembles itself, but Washington, I suppose you would say, avenged its loss. Washington beats Michigan in Seattle, and USC loses to Minnesota. USC loses to the Gophers. So I don't know what to make of that, other than I think we already both thought, okay, Michigan is clearly, they're ranked where they're ranked at the time in the top 10, but they're not that good.
Yeah.
USC, USC is what it is. They're just they're not a playoff contender at this point. So I don't know what any of that means. I just think it's worth mentioning.
Well, and I think these are two teams that preseason people thought were going to be in the mix, and now 1 week in October they both have 2 losses. We just got to talk about all the SEC teams with 1 loss. Well, now my best guess is that Michigan and USC are going to have to run the table if they're going to make the playoff. And looking at their schedules, I don't like the chance of either one to do it. Both of them, I would say even a couple weeks ago, both of them looked like a 9-3, 8-4 type of team anyway. And it looks like that's where they're headed. But it really is interesting how quickly, even in this era of expanded at large spots for the playoff, just 5-6 weeks into the season, you can be in a spot where hopes were high, and now all of a sudden they've dwindled to about nothing. And I think Michigan and USC are both good examples of that.
Yeah, I agreed. So all right. So look, we could keep going, but we can't. So big games this week to look at. There's a couple of pretty big ones. Texas versus OU. 4. Okay, Texas, OU,
2
in
in
Dallas.
the Big Ten, 2 in the SEC.
Texas, OU, and Dallas. What are you going to say? Ole Miss at LSU is a big game.
Ole Miss at LSU is the other one in the SEC.
Then the marquee matchups nationally are Texas, OU, and Dallas, and that's lesser than because of OU's loss. And I don't know how good Oklahoma is, but it's the number 1 team in the country playing its chief rival. Sorry, A&M fans. Ohio State at Oregon is going to feature what? Number 2 versus number 3 or 4? I didn't look at the rankings.
Yeah, it's going to be, You know what? I haven't looked at it. I guess it is out now. Hold on a second.
One of the things that we were looking forward to out of realignment, and there weren't a whole lot of things, is an Ohio State going to Eugene. That kind of thing happening. And Oregon going to the Big House. Those kinds of things you're looking forward to seeing. We get to see that, and they're highly ranked. So those
2
are 2
versus
games.
3.
Those are 2 games where we're looking forward. And there's one more Big Ten matchup.
Yeah, so the other one is Penn State at USC. And while, as we just said, USC looks like it has slim hopes of making the playoff at this point, this is a must-win game for them to still have any chance. You've got Penn State, where I think we're going to learn something about them. I mean, I don't know. You mentioned earlier Missouri, and what have they done to deserve to be ranked where they are? I don't feel a whole lot different about Penn State. Now, Penn State has more talent than Missouri, but I mean, Penn State, jury's still out for me as to how good they are. Beating USC doesn't make them a great team, but this is a game they could very easily lose. And if they do, then I think we kind of reevaluate Penn State and exactly, how strong of a contender they are. And so I think that one is a big game for that reason. You mentioned Ohio State at Oregon. This feels like, and I stress feels like, because we felt this way on other games in previous weeks, and like Alabama, Georgia, and things change pretty quickly. But this feels like a game where whoever wins is getting close to being a lock to make the playoff, right? So that's kind of all I plan on taking out of the game, but I'm looking forward to watching it.
Yeah, just when you thought it was safe to get back in the water, though, this last week happened. So we're looking at those 3 or 4 games there. Something else could pop up at any point, and we'll reevaluate what we think we know about college football based on that. So time to get to our picks, our competition, 4th round of our competition. And Brad, you and I and a few of our listeners are playing along.
Yeah.
So listeners, if you've been playing, you need to send us your 4th team this week. But can you like succinctly explain what we're trying to do here?
Yeah, so basically we started this with we had 12 podcasts left before the selection committee was going to name the playoff field. So we decided each week we would pick one team, add to it every following week, and eventually we would have 12 teams picked. We can pick the same team each week. We're putting together our own lineup, and so far we don't have exactly the same three teams, but we're about to pick our fourth one. I have to this point taken Texas, Ohio State, and Alabama, not looking as good this week. And I've got to take my fourth team, and I'm going to go with Oregon. It's an interesting pick to do right before they play Ohio State, a game that I think they probably will lose. But I've seen enough of Oregon the last few weeks to feel confident that they've gotten better from what they were at the start of the season, which was a little shaky. And even if they lose to Ohio State, I feel good about them managing the rest of the schedule. And so that's why I'm going to go with the Ducks. Truth be told, there's not a pick out there that I love at this point. I think we're all a little nervous are going to be for the next few weeks as far as adding to this list.
Yeah. All right, Brad, you have Texas, Ohio State, Alabama, and Oregon. That's how you picked them in that order.
Yep.
It doesn't really matter. I have Texas, Georgia, and Alabama so far, which means that I could pick Oregon, but I'm going to pick Ohio State, because I think the Buckeyes, win or lose in Eugene, are going to go to the playoffs. So I'm going to go Texas, Georgia, Alabama, and Ohio State. So y'all remember, email us at gridirongospelpod@gmail.com by Wednesday if you're in this competition with us. And we'll see. It's about to get tougher to pick playoff teams. Yeah. And we're already like thinking about some of the ones we thought were locks already. You'll note Brad doesn't have Georgia yet. And I don't have, so we'll see. They
scared me. You know what? I would have taken Georgia if they had blown out Auburn, but Auburn hung around just long enough in that game to, knowing that Georgia still has to go to Ole Miss and to Texas, I'm like, I just want to see Georgia one more time. But anyway, it's going to be a fun competition, and we will see it play out. But now we got to get to halftime. And when we come back for the second half of this podcast, we are going to talk about our faith in Jesus. And we're also going to be joined by a very special guest who's going to do that with us. We'll be right back.
And welcome back to the second half of Gridiron and the Gospel, a faith and college football podcast. And that's when faith comes to the forefront, this second half. Our favorite part. We're going to be joined here in just a little bit by Dean Inserra, friend of the podcast and repeat offender in terms of coming back as a guest, which we really appreciate. And we can get into stuff with him in a minute. But first, a little segment we do called On My Heart. What's God got on our heart here in real time this week? And Brad, it's your turn to share what's on your heart.
Yeah, George, this past Wednesday with the high schoolers, we were going through a study, and the topic of sin is what came up. And there's a lot of, starting with Genesis 3 and the first sin, and then moving forward from there, things that were related to sin. And something that was kind of on my mind as we were going through this, but it never really came up as part of the study, but I've been thinking about it a lot since then, related to sin, and obviously something that every one of us deals with, is in Luke chapter 5, the story of Jesus with the paralyzed man who his friends came and lowered him through the ceiling of the house. And there's a lot, obviously, those who know the story, there's a lot going on there. And Jesus says a few things that are very significant. One thing that's always struck me, actually, that's not true. I was going to say has always struck me. It struck me for the first time about 10 years ago. Up until then, I had not noticed it, but I think it's very significant. And I know it's something that some people miss in this story, is that when the man is lowered down, he is paralyzed. We're told that. We know that Jesus has been performing miracles up to this point that has led a lot of people to take interest in him, start following him. And obviously, this man's friends have a certain level of faith, and presumably the man himself does too, based on what they've heard, that Jesus can heal him. So that's why they go to the trouble. They lower him through. And if you stop and think about what Jesus first says to the man, it's kind of shocking, which is that he says, your sins are forgiven. And I try to imagine what the reaction of the friends was at that point, because we know that they lowered him there to be healed. because he's paralyzed. And Jesus says, your sins are forgiven. And they're probably like, well, okay, but like, what about healing me? Like, this is what I'm here for. And it struck me about 10 years ago is that Jesus doing this, I mean, yes, he is setting up something that he's about to go to later as far as the connection between forgiving the man's sins and healing him. But Jesus, in order to set this up, says that your sins are forgiven. And it occurs to me that he's sending that message that this is the most important thing that he can do for the man, right? I mean, and for every one of us, for all of the problems that we have in our lives, I guess this is what's on my heart, is that for all the things that we can get wrapped up in, like, I need help with this, I need help with that. So whether it's our finances or some sort of health crisis, that man was going through something similar to that, some sort of family dynamic, whatever it may be. I think about the families right now that were in the path of the hurricane that are dealing with so much stuff. And even as heavy as all that is, the most important thing that Jesus can do for any of us is forgive our sins. And that's why he came. And so, and of course, the Pharisees asked the question when he says this, well, who can forgive sins but God alone? And Jesus goes on to kind of answer that, but the direct answer that he didn't actually say in these words was yes, right? Who can forgive sins but God alone? Yes, that's correct. And so, but that's really what's been on my heart, George, is just the idea that we have so many things that just kind of occupy us and that we are obsessed with. And those aren't bad things. I mean, the fact that we even think about going to God for these things, that we need help, that we recognize that we need help and that God is the solution, that's a great thing that we recognize that. But let's not ever lose sight of the fact that the most significant thing that we need help with is forgiveness of our sins. And he's given that to us. It is there for us to choose to accept. And that's the beautiful thing about the gospel. And I just, have been thinking about that a lot lately in relation to that video from this past Wednesday.
Man, I love that. And I appreciate that that's on your heart. As I think as a pastor, it's always interesting too. And I say this like I've been a pastor forever. That would be Dean when we get here in just a second. But as a pastor, it's always interesting to me that when you look at a church's prayer request list, it is a whole lot of good, important things to pray for. But quite often it's a lot of physical ailments and things like that. We ought to pray for those things. What we see less of is ultimately what that person or what this other person who's not on the prayer request or whatever needs is Jesus, and they need their sins forgiven. And so it's like, Lord, help us redirect to understand that that's the important thing. And then, yes, I want to pray for that person's that you would heal them of cancer as well. But Lord, would you heal their heart? So, man, I appreciate that. And I'm glad that's on your heart. Dean Inserra joins us. Feel free, Dean. You're the lead pastor of City Church in Tallahassee, friend of the podcast, friend of mine for a long time. And anything that Brad said that you want to correct? I'm kidding. It's a joke.
It's good to be with you guys. I really appreciate the heart behind that. That was the name of the segment, but I think what you're really getting at is of most importance. Right? The most important thing is that Jesus Christ came to this world to save sinners.
That's right.
And also, I think one of the neat things to think about is our greatest need, he's already met it. How incredible is that? We've already been reconciled to God. So now how much more greater now is our fellowship in this life? We get to live now with that great need already met. So it doesn't mean the other needs, like you said, the other needs certainly matter. God cares about us, like a Heavenly Father cares for his children. But the neat thing about that is we can go full speed ahead, asking God to bring about the other requests we have while being able to sleep at night because we know they're not ultimate. Because God has already dealt with our greatest need. Again, that is not minimizing for a moment the other need, but our greatest need has been met, which is salvation and our need to be reconciled to God. And that's the good news of the gospel. So I appreciate you guys sharing that and letting our listeners just be reminded of that. And you get to hear that over and over again. It's important.
That's right. And if you're hearing this and you don't know Christ, you don't have that relationship with him, and you know that, then reach out to us, right, at our email address, which is at Gridiron. It's gridirongospelpod@gmail.com. Reach out to us or reach out on Twitter to either Brad at JBradEdwards or to me at George Schroeder. We'd love to talk with you. I mean, we love to talk college football, obviously. But, man, if you want to start asking questions about the faith that God has given us, the faith we have in Christ, we want to tell you how to have that same faith and how he can and will forgive your sins. So, man, I appreciate that. I introduced Dean. Dean, here's the biggest question we got for you tonight. Did you stay up last night? We're recording this Sunday afternoon on the 6th of October. Did you stay up last night into the morning to watch your favorite team, the Miami Hurricanes? He's not so much an FSU fan. He grew up a Hurricane fan. Did you stay up to watch them with their dramatic 25-point rally to win 39-38 early in the morning out on the West Coast? I guess late at night there. Whatever.
Yeah, that conference realignment, I'm going to be a curmudgeon about it simply by the fact there was a 10:30 Eastern time kickoff for my team that's on Eastern time. I did not stay up. I preached 4 times on this Sunday that we're talking. I went to the Florida State Clemson game and stayed until mid-third quarter. One thing that stuck out to me was how improved Klubnik is. He's just gotten a lot better. He's really kind of starting to live up to the hype he had coming in. But we came home early so we could watch the Miami game, and I just made a pact beforehand. I was like, I have to go to bed at halftime. Like, I have to, no matter what is going on, I have to make myself go to bed. So I went to bed at halftime, so I wasn't going to check my phone till the morning. So I thought I knew every 10 minutes I'd be checking my phone. I went to bed mad. It was 21-10. So I was like, Miami's falling apart. Cam Ward's too nonchalant. All the things I'm saying. It's like, I go to bed and then wake up, immediately check my phone first thing at the alarm and said, you've got to be kidding me. What in the world happened? And then, of course, been watching highlights ever since and catching up on everything.
Yeah, I went to bed at 35-10. So however frustrated you were, if any Miami fan who chose the same time I did would have been totally resigned. There was at least still a reasonable chance of a comeback at 21-10. 35-10, like it was done. I was shocked when I pulled out the phone this morning and I saw the final score, but it was one of many shocking things that happened on that Saturday that we've already discussed. So we're not going to get into that again, Dean, but on a little bit of that football theme though, just being a pastor in Tallahassee, we talked to you about that last season when FSU was on the way to what ended up being an undefeated regular season and, just a really, really good team that brought a lot of optimism about the direction that the program was heading after some down years. And then you get this, where I believe it's 1-5 that they're sitting at the moment. Even the one win was one that they had to sweat out quite a bit.
Against those Cal Bears,
by the way.
right? Yeah.
Cal, I think, is about done with playing Florida schools because they probably should be 2-0, but they're 0-2. But yeah, Dean, just looking at where Florida State is right now, that dynamic of being a pastor in a church that I would imagine is mostly Florida State fans, how does that kind of change your day to day, and to what degree do you play off of it, acknowledge it, anything like that? Because I know to a lot of people there, it's not funny.
Yeah, and I don't know how much more this season my heart can handle from a Miami perspective. I was at the Virginia Tech Miami game the week before, so I was there for that. So it's been an interesting football season. So here's how it works for me now. The only thing I can really ever get away with is probably poking fun at Miami or the University of Florida. So Gators are enough. Gator fans are sensitive too, but there's enough minority that they just kind of know how it is being in Tallahassee. So I can make a joke in a sermon about University of Florida, and people eat it up. And the Gators afterwards will go, "Oh, come on," and kind of have fun with it. But here's the Florida. This is really important to understand the role of a pastor in a college football town. When Florida State is playing as bad as they are right now, just having the season they're having right now, what comes into play for it pastorally is the humanity side of it. Because being a fan, it's just sort of numbers and jerseys and tradition and jersey, program and just that side of it. But I have coaches who are members here. And we have players on the team who are members here and have had kind of a hard time this year. We had a church member that I was afraid was going to lose his starting spot because of a couple just little inconsistencies the last couple of weeks. And I'm at the game, they do the starting lineup on the big jumbotron, and he wasn't starting. I went, oh man, it happened. So I saw him this morning. I love that guy. He's a human being. He's hurting worse than anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that side of it. So for me to ever like poke fun or to make even kind of like a lighthearted jab, and I don't mean as a Miami fan. Forget that. I can put that aside. I mean just like it's kind of common in a sports town to make a joke about the team from the pulpit. I don't do that. Not because I'm taking it too seriously, but because these are church members. This is their livelihood. Right? They want to win more than anyone. They're hurt more than anybody. Their families are nervous because, of course, they wonder, are we going to be here next year? They haven't told me that, but like you just know, it's just part of the nature of it. So I think that's one thing that it does. And from the city, like it really does hurt the town when the team is down. It hurts the economy because less people are coming into town, less people are excited, less people are talking longer. I mean, it really does. You hear local restaurants talk about how different it was last year. Now things were booming. People wanted to be here. Jordan Travis and all the things people were excited about. And now it's just not that way at all. So we'll see. And then the things like hard to get excited about things too because now they had a quarterback change. So I mean DJ was at our Easter service. So when you see everybody go crazy over a quarterback change at the game, the loudest ovation of the game is that announcement, and that quarterback staying on the field. It's just hard. So I just really try to have the right perspective about those kind of things and see the humanity side of it. These are church members, some of these folks.
I think that was a really good word. Look, we got all sorts of listeners, right? But some of them are pastors. Some number of our listeners are pastors. And I think the majority of our listeners are just college football fans who love Jesus. And some of them are college football fans who don't know Jesus yet. And those are the ones we talked about, I was talking with earlier. But that's a good word, especially for those of us who are pastoring in a town that loves its college team or its high school team. I think of the pastors that you and I both know, and I'm one of them, who pastors in a town that loves its high school football, its high school sports, its whatever. I think I'm really going to hang on to something that you said, finally, Dean, something that you said, and I'm kidding. But in that, man, you don't want to joke about things, maybe when it's positive or whatever, but you don't want to joke about things. You want to be really careful even how you reference things when it's not going the way everybody wanted it to, because we define success by wins and losses when it comes to sports. That's true with high school football, just like it is with college football. So we got pastors out there who listen to us, and I appreciate you guys doing it. You're in a town where the high school football season by now is about halfway or 60% over, and it's not going the way people wanted it to. You got people in your seats that are maybe they're hurting. I mean, it may not be the way it's going in Tallahassee, but it might be. Man, that is a good word for just to me to remember that. Thankfully, our guys are playing fairly well right now here in Fairfield, Texas. But I need to remember that. I'll give you an example. I made a reference. They were off this on Friday, but they're 3-2. They've won 3 in a row. They're heading into district play. And we went and watched them play on the road, and they scored 10 touchdowns. And missed an extra point, right? And 69-40. I wish they had got to 70 or whatever, but it was 69-40 because in the second half, all of a sudden they had stopped this team really well, but then it became a track meet. And it just went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And I made a reference to that on last Sunday morning. And the high school football coach is one of our good godly men. The athletic director for the school district is one of our good godly men in our church. He loves Jesus. He loves those students. He wants them to know Jesus. And I just sort of made a reference to that 69-40 score. And I don't remember exactly what I said, but I kind of thought to myself after I said it, I'm not sure that came out the way I wanted it to, because I know they won and they won big, but he's a football coach and he's going to hate what his defense gave up and how that became a track meet and they can never just sort of, close things off, even in a win. And so I'm learning as I go, and it's like, Lord, help me not put my foot in my mouth just to make somebody laugh. So sorry, I didn't mean to dominate play there, but it's just, you made me think about that just now again. So thanks.
Yeah, and I have to, because party just wants to go up there. It's the most relevant thing in our town is to go up there and always make references. But I also want our coaches to feel like I know the word safe space. I'm not using it in a cultural way of it's used so often. I mean it like we're church can be a place where they can just get away from that for a little while. I still use football illustrations and I talk sports and those kind of things, but I'm going to really tread lightly when it comes to talking about Florida State here in town.
Do you notice, and I just want to ask this real quick. I know you've got a couple questions too, Brad, but Dean, do you notice a difference on Sunday mornings just when you're kind of in the halls, or can you notice a difference in a vibe in terms of energy or whatever, just from your people?
Oh, no doubt. It's definitely different. I mean, it truly does affect things. I see what people wear. After a win, everybody's in Florida State polos on Sunday morning. The conversation about football is probably more after a loss than anything else. Everybody's breaking it down and being Monday morning quarterbacks and that kind of thing. But it definitely does hurt the vibe. 8 o'clock game after a loss, as long as games go now, our 8:30 service has a much less attendance than it normally would. Florida State winning just creates an entire just culture in our town of just happiness and people just being more joyful. It really does contribute to the fabric of it. And church definitely feels that. And church is not immune from that at all. Where they say that culture is it's downstream. Church is downstream from culture. We totally see football here in our town, definitely.
Well, Dean, I was want to ask you about a conference you have coming up, just because I've heard it referenced or promoted a couple of times on some podcasts that I listen to. Keep the Fire Burning. It's in Syracuse, about a week from the time we're recording this. I don't know, what it'll be relative to when a lot of people are listening to this, but it's October, 14th through 16th?
Yes,
I think it is.
At Northside Church in Syracuse with
So
Pastor
tell
Bruce
us a little bit about what's going on there.
Yeah, it's my first time actually ever going to Syracuse. I've been to New York City and been to Cooperstown, but I've never actually been to Syracuse. I'm excited to get up there. Bruce Aubrey is a longtime pastor, just retired from being the senior pastor of his church in Syracuse. He's had a big long-term impact on the university there in athletics, and just really kind of a fixture of faithfulness in the city. And his passion in his retirement is encouraging pastors and ministry leaders to keep that fire burning, as it's called. So he invited me to come up there and speak at. I'm preaching 2 different times, and I'm really looking forward to it. So if you're in the area up there, we'd love for anyone to come by and come be a part of the conference. And also H.B. Charles, pastor in Jacksonville, Florida, down here, really faithful preacher, is going to be there as well. So 2 of us are preaching, and it's going to be a good time. So I'd love to meet you and come on up to Syracuse. Hoping to go over and see the Carrier Dome and also try to find some old spots at Jim Brown and Ernie Davis. And I'm going to look around a little bit and see if I can find some spots.
Man, I love that. It's interesting, Dean. Obviously, you've written several books. I want to ask you about one of them here in a minute. In the context of this, you've written several books. You are sometimes speaking at conferences and things like that. Here's what I love about you. When we first met, I was still at USA Today, and it's because you're a sports fan that we met. Ended up getting to know each other for that reason. As a pastor, what I love is, despite the fact that because of those books and to a large degree, you find yourself sometimes at these conferences, you're about the local church. I love that. And so the book I was referencing, and I went and pulled it out of my deal, is A Short Guide to Church. What is it all about? You wrote that recently. That's been really helpful to me. And it's kind of little bite-sized chunks of, here's the different topics of church, of what church is, that you can sort of share with others who are kind of not really sure what it is too. But could you tell me a little bit about why it is? And I even think you've got some sort of a new thing where City Church in Tallahassee is emphasizing the word local, I think, if I've got that right.
Oh, yeah.
Can you kind of tell me why you're a giant fan of the local church, and what does that actually mean when you say that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's more to being a Christian than going to church. There's definitely not less. Like, the local church really is God's design for his people. So something happened over time where the local church kind of lost its luster in the minds of believers, or you might go but not really that committed. Go when you can. And we started saying things like, well, you don't have to go to church, in order to be a Christian. I can have church anywhere, on the golf course. I can have it having brunch in bed. And we started believing that. And I don't know where we got it from. It's a very just kind of new way of thinking. Rather than seeing the local church as God's design and what we're invited to be a part of. So I love the local church, one, because it's God's idea, and 2, because it really is. I think Charles Spurgeon called it the dearest place. And again, it's not a perfect place this side of heaven, but it's a place where we get to grow in our faith and be around other believers and be encouraged to go live for Christ and mission. It all flows from the local church. The local church has always been designed to be the place where everything else in the Christian life flows from. So I'm just really committed to being local and being someone who is for Tallahassee and anchored and rooted in Tallahassee and believes the local church is right smack in the middle of that. Because we've been saying for a long time, if the local church is God's plan A for his people, then why shouldn't the local church be a big, very vibrant part of Tallahassee life? So we think the best thing we can be for our community is a vibrant, dynamic local church. Because the capital C church, as in all believers everywhere, that's obviously a biblical idea and concept, but it's not the emphasis in the scriptures. It's the lowercase c church localized. Paul wrote letters to individual congregations that were organized and had leaders. The local church has always been God's plan. So we're saying, hey, people want to talk about eating local and buying local. Hey, you know what else? We church local, because that's how God designed things to be. So I'm going to be the biggest cheerleader there is for it. Not just because I'm a pastor, but because I'm a Christian. This is what God's designed for us.
Yeah, I mean, I think we see like this sort of deal where we're so sort of interconnected, and we can like as it relates to church, as it relates to your Christian life, your Christian growth. I can go watch your sermons online, right? I can go find some guy out in California or wherever, and I can sort of think to myself, I can get fed by these guys, and I can be, but we have sort of grown so individualistic that we think we can curate our own discipleship. And that's not how God designed this. He designed us to be together with other people and in a local context. And that's not to say that those aren't good aids for us. And it's neat that we can do those things now that we couldn't do before.
They're supplements. They need to be seen as supplemental.
Right. Supplemental instead of primary. The primary place is the local church. It's where you are the church together. You're a community of believers following Jesus together. And in all the ups and the downs and everything else, just sort of push, pull, discipling, all of that, and learning and growing, and then reaching your own community. So, man, I love that.
And that's one thing that I just want to be able to say out loud that I respect so much about the Florida State football coaches who are part of our church, as well as a couple of basketball coaches, baseball coaches. They are obviously extremely busy and have unique schedules in terms of weekend demand, travel. They are here on Sunday mornings. They make it a priority. Because in athletic culture, with kind of faith in football culture, it's really easy to sort of supplement it only with chaplaincies and kind of maybe FCA camp during the summer for a week, those kind of team prayer, those kind of ideas. And God doesn't say that the local church is for believers unless you are really busy with sports. So I'm really thankful with the example those guys set. Like the SMU game a couple of weeks ago, one of the coaches was here for our 8:30 service. I looked at him and I said, "What time did you get in?" He said 5 a.m. who are very young, elementary school age, to see this is the most important thing. So he got up that early. I wouldn't come to the 8:30 service. Are you kidding? That's the service I normally go to. But it's that kind of stuff where it's awesome to see coaches and athletes say, the local church matters to me. I want to show my family that nothing gets in the way of this happening. If we're in town, we're going to be here in other words. Kind of thing. I just love that.
I love it.
Dean, as we speak right now, we are within 1 month of an election. And I know this is not your first time to go through this with your congregation. So can you tell us a little bit about what you've learned from previous experiences and kind of how you handle the dynamics of an election? We talked earlier about dynamics of football and how emotional that is for people. Obviously, this is another thing that carries a lot of emotion for it on both sides and in many ways can be divisive, right? And so what is your approach when it comes to elections, both national and local, as it applies to church?
I'm in a capital city, so it's very relevant in terms of that. So I just chose a couple of years ago that we're going to lean in more than we are avoid it. And I started a sermon series actually today, and I'm recording on Sunday. I started a series today on Christians in politics. And I think there's kind of been this, somehow it's been declared by the world, these rules that's been given to Christians, that Christians should be neutral when it comes to politics. I just, no other group of people has that rule placed upon them, except for Christians. So I just push back at that. That does not mean be partisan, but it means there's real issues that we're not going to be neutral on because the Bible's not neutral on. And so so we say regularly here is, it's not the church has gotten more political, it's that politics have gotten more spiritual. So when the government moved from issuing driver's license and building roads and defending the nation during a time of war to having opinions on gender and marriage and issues of life, it's not the church that moved, the government moved, or I say politics moved. So it's not that we're getting out of our lane; they're actually getting into ours. So I just think we need to make sure that the Bible's driving it. So that's why I try to say to our congregation is, hey, look, I'm not going to come up here and give you an opinion on, economics, because I don't have clear things from the scriptures outside of be generous, help the poor, like you be wise, with your, the borrowers slave the lender. I mean, like I have principles, but like I don't know how to think through what the Fed should be doing or interest rates. Like that's not our lane. I'm not going to get into all the details of gun control. I don't have Bible verses that tell us how the United States of America should interpret the Second Amendment in 2024. That isn't my lane. But I am going to talk about being engaged. Being salt and light. I am going to talk about human dignity. I am going to talk about what marriage is and what marriage is not. I am going to talk about people being made in the image of God. Like those are oftentimes what we think are political issues are actually spiritual issues. So I'm going to push back on the fact this is politics. I think about if you go back to let's just go pre-Civil War America, where slavery was common practice. Obviously, and there are pastors that are shunned by history, and rightly so. And you can look them up. That advocated for slavery from the pulpit. And there are also pastors that are viewed as heroes, rightfully so, who advocated for abolition from the pulpit. There's a whole group that doesn't get talked about very often, and that's the group that said nothing. And if you went back in time and talked to them, they probably wouldn't endorse slavery. They would probably say, no, we're not. They whisper to you, we're not for it. Well, man, why aren't you talking about it? If we went back to the future in Doc Brown and Marty McFly's time machine, went back in time to that time and had lunch with them, here's what you might hear. You might hear, well, you know what? We just want to focus on the gospel.
Mm-hmm.
We don't think church should get too political. We just think it's about heart change, not legislating morality. Or what if somebody brings a guest for the first time? We talk about, people forget how slavery was a political issue. Like we're so far removed from it, we just see it as evil. Like we don't know that it actually had serious political implications. So to speak about it was to engage politics. And I'm afraid that right now we have allowed this strange thing to happen where we are hesitant talk about anything political when there are obviously clear spiritual issues and issues of sin and darkness and wickedness that we need to confront head on from the pulpit. We have a Bible that does, and also we have a Savior who's the answer to it all. So to answer your question in kind of a long way is I lean in, and I try to make sure I have accountability around me, and I'm being self-aware that in my leaning in, I'm not being partisan from the pulpit, but that I'm also not shy about, hey, things oftentimes aren't equal on certain moral issues that the parties stand for. And we're going to talk about it. We're going to lean in. So that's kind of how I approach it. Because we're in a government town, and we've learned is folks want to hear about it. That they want their church to address it if it's done in a biblical manner. And in the same way, I want our football players and our football coaches to feel like they're valued here, and we don't take cheap shots. I want all of our church members who work in downtown politics in Tallahassee to not think that we believe politics is bad. It's not politics that's bad. It's the sin in politics that's bad. So we want to encourage our politicians and encourage those who work in government and say, you're doing awesome work. Like, we're for you. We need believers in the public square. So we need more coaches on football teams. We need more Christians on the governor's administration. We want to encourage those who are doing it. So I just decided we're going to lean in. And sometimes people get mad because they just can't think clearly. They can't see, just how they get mad when the church is doing anything political when they realize they're the ones being too political by being so outraged over a conversation. So that's what I do.
That is a good word. I appreciate that. I guess I would be remiss if I didn't ask you one quick question about an actual hurricane. Hurricane Helene went sort of through Tallahassee. Can you give us a feel, because we're all focused on sort of the astonishingly sad pictures that we're seeing from, the mountains of Western North Carolina, basically, which is not traditional place we think of being hurt by a hurricane, much less devastated. And so obviously the amount of rain they got. But what was it like in Tallahassee? And obviously we're in hurricane season. As we record this, there's a possibility that there is another one that's coming somewhere. We just don't know what it's going to be like and where it's going to go yet. Perhaps as our listeners are listening, there's more clarity there. How did Tallahassee fare? And what's city churches in your role when those kinds of things are coming through?
Yeah, well, pre-hurricane, we thought it was doom and gloom. It just kind of felt different. We're used to storms. A lot of people don't freak out. We're just kind of used to it. But this one just felt different in terms of how they were talking about it and kind of the alarms that were sounding figuratively. And by and large, don't get me wrong, some people in our community had trees go through roofs and those kind of things. But by and large, Tallahassee was really spared. But we're surrounded by, for folks that don't know their kind of panhandle geography. So Tallahassee, capital, college city, but all around us for miles is as rural can be. It's more like South Alabama than it is like the rest of the state of Florida. And those communities, our surrounding counties, got absolutely clobbered. Valdosta, Georgia, which is an hour and a half away from us, absolutely clobbered. First Baptist Church of Valdosta had a tree go through their roof and destroy their organ at their church, let alone the homes. People were still without power when I was talking to a couple of people this past week in Valdosta. So that's very close to Tallahassee. So it was really rough for a lot of our surrounding areas. But my community where I live was thankfully spared. But we're very mindful that in us being spared, it meant others got plummeted. So one of the first things we want to do is we want to be a praying people. So we designated time in our service to pray for God just to really be with those in the recovery efforts. And then there's only so much you don't want to spread yourself so thin. So we're the kind of church that would rather do one or two things really well than 100 things okay. So we picked Perry, Florida, which is a small rural town, actually home of LeGarrette Blount, former Oregon running back and New England Patriot.
Yes, sir.
He's a legend there. But they're about an hour away from us, and they have had two.
He's also a legend in Boise.
Yes, he is through that punch.
I shouldn't have said that.
But they got hit really hard again. I mean, they got hit last time. So we have several members who are from Perry's. We did a collection today, Sunday morning, and our folks really responded. They gave us a list of needs. So we're not doing just random stuff. We can actually be helpful. And they sent us a list of needs, and we made sure that we're doing that. So we're all week long, we're collecting at our church for just the list they gave us of needs in the community from others down there. And then we're encouraging our church members to make donations to Send Relief, which is what our network of churches does for disaster relief. And we just want to be champions of that as well. And it's been hard to see what's happening in Western North Carolina. That's near and dear to my family. My kids go to camp up there. I'm a big FCA guy, and Black Mountain's like hallowed ground in FCA land for camp. So it's just, and we have friends up there, churches up there that we know and love. So it's been really hard to see, and I'm really prayerfully hoping that it can recover and come back as soon as possible.
Man, I just agreed. And y'all, listeners, obviously you guys have been paying attention to this too, but continue to pray for the folks there. That is a long-term recovery, and that's for the people who didn't lose loved ones or lose everything else. It's a long-term recovery for the entire area, and some people were completely devastated. Many obviously lost their lives. So continue to pray. And I do appreciate the fact that you mentioned Send Relief. Send Relief, our church is a Southern Baptist church. Send Relief is a collaboration of the International Mission Board and the North American Mission Board of the Southern Baptist Convention. That is a tremendous way. If you don't know how you can help and you want to do something, first, pray. And then secondly, if you wanted to consider giving to Send Relief, you could designate it for Hurricane Helene relief efforts, I'm sure. That would be a tremendous way to do it. They do tremendous work. And so I really appreciate them. And I'm thankful that I'm thankful to be cooperating in that particular group of churches for that reason, and for other reasons too, but for that reason. So I love that. I'm glad you mentioned that. Brad, I think we got to wrap this thing up.
Yeah. So. Unfortunately, we do. But Dean, thank you so much for joining us. And hey, I guess two things before we part. One, I hope the season gets better for your congregation that follows the Seminoles, because it is an historically bad season that they're going through right now. And as we know, it only takes a few wins toward the end to start to build optimism toward next year. That's just the way we're built as fans, right? So a few wins, I think the attitude will be different. And the other is, I hope that your Hurricanes don't give you too many more gray hairs before the end of it. But all in all, I'm pretty optimistic about their chances to make the playoff. So,
well, if you guys are Heisman voters, I don't know if you still are or not, but Cam Ward for Heisman, make it happen, guys.
Would love to do that.
He's fun to watch, man.
Yeah, very cool. So Dean Inserra, lead pastor of City Church, man, I love it. I love having you on the program.
Thanks.
We've had him on as a guest. We had him on an emergency podcast when Nick Saban retired, and he's liable to pop up at any point. And I appreciate the fact that you like to come on and talk sports and faith with us. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I appreciate the heart of both of you, and this. I think it's a great ministry you guys have for this podcast. So thanks for having me. Anytime, guys.
All right, appreciate it. Dean
Thanks
Inserra.
again.
He's the lead pastor of City Church. Hey, listen, we do have to go, but you can visit us online at gridironandthegospel.com. You can find us on Twitter or Instagram at gridiron_gospel.
You can reach out to us on Twitter. As George said earlier, you can find him at George Schroeder, and you can find me at jbradedwards, or you can email us at gridirongospelpod@gmail.com.
Yeah, and as always, be sure to rate, review, subscribe in your favorite podcast app. If you know where it is, we're on all the major podcasting platforms. Just search for Gridiron and the Gospel, or follow the links on the show website to find us.
And if you'd like to partner with us with Gridiron and the Gospel in any way, we would love to explore that with you. Just email us at the address I mentioned earlier, gridirongospelpod@gmail.com.
Yeah, and tune in next week for more Gridiron and the Gospel, a faith and college football podcast.